Russia's mounted a hugely successful influence campaign to try to convince everybody that if they are obstructed or offended, or worst of all, if they are defeated, that will lead to a nuclear war. We've traced how that's been a propaganda campaign that's been delivered from all levels of Russia's information warfare apparatus, from Putin at the top, down through the propagandists on state television, the trolls on social media, and the agents of influence in our own societies, to try to convince everybody that you cannot get in Russia's way, otherwise there's going to be a nuclear war. That's exactly the reason why Western countries have been so timid in delivering the weapon systems to Ukraine that it needs to win the war. Instead, delivering those weapons in tiny doses, just enough to keep Russia from defeating Ukraine altogether, but not enough to bring the war to an end. We're still a year into the conflict, having the same conversations about delivery of combat aircraft and Western armor that we were having in the first week. And most of that is because of the way Russia has successfully deterred the West from helping Ukraine. It's also the reason why Western politicians say that Russia must not be defeated, because they have become convinced that that means there's likely to be a nuclear escalation. All of this is a huge success for Russia because it means that Russia can escape the consequences of what it is doing to Ukraine. There's no other European country that would be permitted to launch a genocidal war of colonial reconquest against its neighbor in the way that Russia is doing, and then carry out the kind of atrocities that we've seen delivered by Russian troops on the ground. It is only nuclear weapons that allows Russia to do this. None of the situations that Russia is describing as a potential trigger for nuclear use actually hold good in real life. We've seen time and again how Russia's so-called red lines evaporate when you get close to them. But still, Russia's managed to convince so many politicians and decision makers across the West that they have to tiptoe and they have to shield Russia from the consequences of its invasion. And we ought to have learned by now that there's a big difference between what Putin says and what Russia does. Now, that recognition is starting to filter through into assessments of Russia's nuclear threats and how real or unreal they might be. But the way to bring the war in Ukraine to an end as rapidly as possible is to give Ukraine as much support as possible so that it can push forward and win. At the moment, we are just keeping Ukraine afloat, but that just prolongs the suffering, prolongs the agony. The best way is to ensure that Russia can be defeated in Ukraine and evicted from Ukrainian territory. We hear a lot of predictions about how Putin's position is growing increasingly shaky, and if the war goes badly, he might be challenged for the leadership. Now, long-term Russia watchers will have a bit of a cynical view of this because they've been hearing that for so many years. Long before the Ukraine conflict escalated in the way it did last year, we heard these confident predictions that the days of the Putin regime were numbered. In reality, Putin has a lot of reserves of strength and stability within the regime to keep control, because there are no outside forces that would actually have an interest in dislodging him at the moment. It is only if the war goes so catastrophically badly that somebody within the inner circle with power decides they have to remove Putin to stop it getting worse and risk all of the instability that that would trigger, that we might see some change in the Russian political system. The problem is Putin seems confident that Russia can wait the West out, that they can continue pouring in antiquated armored vehicles and enough bodies to soak up Ukrainian bullets that they can stay in the fight and wait until the West gets bored and gives up supporting Ukraine. And of course, in a war of attrition, Russia can last longer because they don't count the cost of the casualties, and that's nothing compared to the geostrategic gains that they're looking forward to of trying to seize part of Ukraine and rebuild the Russian Empire. The real challenge, of course, is that if there is a ceasefire, if there is a cessation of hostilities in Ukraine that leaves Russia in charge of even part of it, for Moscow, that's a success, and it will just be an encouragement to have another go after waiting 5, 10 more years, however long it takes to rebuild Russia's strength.